I'm Rahel Philipose, and you are listening to Three Things, the Indian Express News Show. In this episode, we discuss why the United States is returning 105 smuggled antiquities back to India. We also talk about a scheme by the Jharkhand government which aims to provide alternative livelihoods to women who used to sell rice beer. But first, we talk about the second meeting of the opposition alliance. Over a month ago, 16 opposition parties had decided to come together to contest against the ruling BJP in the upcoming Lok Sabha polls. On Tuesday, they all met in Bengaluru with an addition of 10 more parties who joined their camp, taking the total to 26. And in this conclave, they came up with a name for their alliance. That name, India, or the Indian National Developmental Inclusive Alliance. Shortly after it was concluded, Prime Minister Narendra Modi in a speech called the opposition meeting a conclave of the corrupt, whose mantra is of, by and for the family.
ये तो कट्टर भ्रष्टाचारी सम्मेलन हो रहा है। भ्रष्टाचार की इस दुकान में जुटे हुए ये सभी परिवारवाद के कट्टर समर्थक हैं। न खाता
To know more about the meeting, my colleague Shashank Bhargava speaks to the Indian Express's Manoj CG, who writes on the opposition for the paper and who was in Bengaluru to cover the meet.
Manoj, firstly, tell us whose idea was it to call the alliance India?
So we were told that Mr. Rahul Gandhi suggested this idea of naming the grouping India, and he told K.C. Venugopal, the AICC General Secretary in charge of organization, to check with Mamata Banerjee first, the West Bengal Chief Minister and Trinamool Congress Chief. And we were given to understand that she readily agreed. Her suggestion was that, instead of Indian National Developmental Inclusive Alliance, maybe Indian New Development Inclusive Alliance or something like that. And broadly, there was an agreement between the Trinamool Congress and the Congress. So this was some sort of a jugalbandi between these two parties. And it was also suggested that Mamata Banerjee should propose the name at the meeting. So many of the other parties, we were told that 5-6 parties were told about it. But most of the other parties were really in the dark in that sense. They really did not have much idea about this name being talked about and all. So in the meeting, according to the script, after Congress President Mallikarjun Kharge made his opening remarks, the second speaker was Mamata Banerjee, and she proposed this name.
And you said that the other parties were kept in the dark about it. So once the name was proposed, what did they make of it?
So when Mamata Banerjee proposed this name, Nitish Kumar, the Bihar Chief Minister, he kind of asked, how can a political formation be named India after the country? So that was a reservation that he had expressed. The left parties were totally taken by surprise. We know the kind of relations the left has with the Trinamool. So they broke into a huddle. We were given to understand that in the middle of the meeting where CPM General Secretary Sitaram Yechury, his CPI counterpart D. Raja, Forward Bloc General Secretary G. Devarajan, they kind of, exchanged notes and they decided to suggest their own name. So Mr. Yechury suggested V for India. V can be V for victory or WEV. Many of the other leaders thought that sounded like a slogan, V for India. Then there were some other names also. Mehbooba Mufti, we were told that suggested that, it can be called a Bharat Jodo Alliance, since the Bharat Jodo Yatra taken out by Rahul Gandhi was a huge success. It can be called Bharat Jodo Yatra. Then there were names like People's Alliance, Alliance for the People. So several names were suggested, but on this name, on the name India, there was a broad agreement. Of course, Nitish had his reservations. The left was not very happy with it, but in the end, it was decided that this is the best that the parties can come up with.
And what did they say was the main reason behind choosing this name? Was it to send a message that it's NDA versus the idea of India?
So the Congress, has been, trying hard to counter the BJP's nationalism plank. It may be ironical given the fact that the Congress was at the forefront, the International Congress was at the forefront of the freedom movement. And they find it really hard to, counter the nationalism plank of the BJP. So they've been thinking about, how to do it. So the idea behind this name is perhaps the first step to, enter into this political battlefield where the BJP always talks about nation first. Their campaign slogans are mostly, nationalistic. So how to counter that? So this is the first step in that direction. And secondly, it's India versus NDA. So that gives a broader campaign slogan, a catchy campaign slogan. The idea of India, which Rahul Gandhi and the Congress and most of the opposition parties have been talking about, is rise from their ideology. So they see the idea of India, emanating or stemming from their ideology. Of course, the BJP will have, their own version of the idea of India. So that's a subjective argument which these parties can argue, and you and I can argue. But the broad idea is that, how to counter this nationalism plank of the BJP, where they talk about India, where they talk about Bharat, where they talk about nation first. Many of these government schemes are, Skill India, Startup India, Khelo India. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi, when he, goes abroad, he makes these powerful speeches about, Indians and the 140 crore Indians. So the BJP has managed to identify itself as a nationalistic force. So it is on this battlefield where the opposition will now have to play. So this name is the conscious, attempt to counter this BJP's, we can call, monopoly over nationalism, over this plank.
Now, Manoj, we know that when such big alliances are formed, seat sharing becomes the main issue. When the parties had met in Patna, this was not discussed. Was it discussed this time?
On the proposed agenda, there was a line that, they will discuss the process of seat sharing on a state-to-state basis. But it was not discussed. Most of the time was devoted to, finalizing the name for the alliance. But it's clearly a very tricky issue. Tricky because in at least 4-5 states, the constituents are ranged against each other. In Kerala, from where Rahul Gandhi was an MP, the left and the CPM-led left and the Congress are the main opponents. Moved to West Bengal, the Trinamool Congress and the Congress plus left, they had an alliance last time. They are fighting against each other. In Punjab and in Delhi, it's the Aam Aadmi Party versus Congress fight. In Uttar Pradesh, Akhilesh Yadav had been, saying that he will go solo. He will not go enter in an alliance with any national party. He may have some, regional, local, state level parties joining as part of a coalition. So maybe in some of these states, there is very little chance of a real seat sharing on the ground. In most of the other states, it is fairly easy. In Maharashtra, there's already a structure in place of the Mahavikas Agadi between Shiv Sena, UBT, NCP, Power faction, and the Congress. So they have to, settle seat sharing among themselves. In Bihar, it's JDU, RJD, and Congress. They have to, decide among themselves. In Jharkhand, it's JMM and the Congress. In Tamil Nadu, it's the DMK-led alliance. They have to decide amongst themselves. In most of the North Indian states, the Congress is the main dominant player. Also, other parties of this alliance have, little presence. So it is fairly easy in most of the states, but difficult in at least 5 states.
And Manoj, after the meeting was concluded, the parties also released a joint statement. What stood out to you about that?
Again, before the meeting, the proposed agenda, which was to be discussed, it contained the word common minimum program. Now, many of the parties felt common minimum program is generally, associated with governance. So if at all, in the event of these parties coming to power, this phrase of common minimum program, and it's actually, it's a left from the left lexicon. So the Trinamool Congress, of course, will not be very happy with that. So they were saying, we should be identifying agenda points where we all can unite. So in that sense, so this common minimum program, that formulation was kind of junked, and they decided where they can identify some issues initially to start with, because they were looking at incremental progress from one meeting to the next. So what stood out is that one line, perhaps in the last paragraph, which says, we will come out with an alternative political, social, and economic agenda. Apart from that, it's all the stated positions by most of the parties. Now they have put it into a joint statement where they spoke about the rising crimes against women, the hatred and violence being manufactured against minorities, atrocities against Dalits, Adivasis, Kashmiri Pandits and all, and caste census, of course, and the attack on the federal structure, how governors are being used to target elected governments, and the attack on the constitutional rights and freedoms. So these are the main points of that joint statement. Primarily, these are issues where there is unanimity, where they can speak in one voice. For instance, there was no specific mention of the Uniform Civil Code. There is much debate in the country about whether the BJP government would come out with a bill on UCC. So those are issues which, if they mention it specifically, then of course there will be divisions. Parties will speak in different voices. So they wanted to avoid all that. So that's why there is no mention of any specific issue, and it's spoken in generic terms.
Right, and now apart from the name and the joint statement, the other major development we came to know about was that the next opposition meeting will be held in Mumbai, and it will be hosted by Shiv Sena. Talk about the significance of that.
Because the first meeting was in Patna, so that was seen as the eastern part of the country. Then the second meeting was held in Bangalore, the southern part of the country. So the idea was that let's host the meeting in the western part. So of course Maharashtra. So Mr. Uddhav Thackeray was asked about it on the previous night itself, whether he can host the conclave in Mumbai. The significance, of course, is that, given the political developments that has happened in Maharashtra over the last 6-8 months, where first the Shiv Sena split and recently the NCP split. So the opposition parties, the Mahavikas Aghadi, has suffered major setbacks and reverses in the recent past. And both of them, the NCP power faction, if you can say it like that, and the Shiv Sena Uddhav Thackeray faction, they are trying hard to rebuild their respective bases in terms of organization and in terms of electoral base. So going to Maharashtra, going to Mumbai with this huge posse of leaders, and there is also a plan to hold the first joint rally in Mumbai during that opposition conclave. So it's sent a very significant political message to the state that the splits have not dampened the spirits of these parties, and all the others are now standing shoulder to shoulder with them. So that sort of message they wanted to convey. That's why most likely in the second half of August, the conclave will happen in Mumbai.
And we understand that after the meeting was over, Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke out against it. In fact, he told a gathering of 38 NDA allies in the capital that this is a coalition based on the compulsion of power and dynastic politics, and that this coming together of the opposition parties was harmful to the country. Now, do we get a sense if the NDA is worried about this coalition?
No, the opposition surely believes that the BJP is rattled. It was one of the threats that emanated from the opposition camp when BJP decided to hold this mega conclave of the NDA with some 38 parties attending, was that they were referring to Prime Minister's speech in Rajya Sabha some time ago, where he said कि मैं अकेला सब पर भारी हूँ. So then they were referring to that and asking if he was so overwhelming on the opposition parties, if he was so bhari on everyone, then what is the need for now cobbling together these so many smaller, bigger parties from across the country and make this big show on the same day when the opposition conclave was taking place in Bangalore. So they believe the BJP is clearly rattled. Of course, the sense from the BJP would be completely different. Of course, they have their own reasons to assemble such a large number of parties from across the country. And this charge that the opposition camp is full of diners, this is not a new charge. Prime Minister Modi and the BJP had been hurling this for some time, right from 2014. But of course, in politics, how will you counter each other? So if 26 opposition parties are coming together to form an alliance and they give a signal that they will fight the elections together, the BJP will have to, and Prime Minister Modi will have to counter them. And of course, the opposition will have their counter charge about how the BJP is, attacking the constitution, the federal system. So these are expected lines of attack against each other, which will only sharpen as we move towards the general elections.
And next we talk about smuggled artifacts. Earlier this week, 105 smuggled antiquities were returned to India by the United States. Many of these artifacts are more than 1,000 years old, with some even dating back to the 1st century BC. And officials say that most of these items were smuggled abroad illegally by a single person, the jailed antique dealer Subhash Kapoor. About 5 months ago, an Indian Express investigation had traced over 77 trafficked pieces housed at New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art to the 73-year-old art smuggler who is serving a 10-year prison term in Tamil Nadu for smuggling antiquities. After the investigation, the New York Supreme Court had issued a search warrant to seize stolen property from the museum, and the Met ultimately announced that it would return 15 antiquities to India. And since then, the restitution of Indian antiquities has become an integral part of the India-US diplomatic ties as well. During his recent visit to the US, Prime Minister Modi had said that the country's decision to return the antiquities to India shows the emotional bond between the two nations. In this segment, the Indian Express's Divya A talks about the US's decision, the history of these artifacts, and how they ended up in the US. So, Divya, can you first tell us how these artifacts actually got to the US in the first place?
So, these articles were smuggled, stolen from India, stolen from various places in India a long time back, and smuggled abroad through illegal means, apparently. And during recent auctions and, cataloging, they were discovered to have been, illegally procured from India. And smuggling of these artifacts was very rampant till the biggest antique dealer or smuggler of all times, Mr. Subhash Kapoor, was arrested. And most of these artifacts were connected to him, that he sold to museums, he sold to auction houses. So it was very rampant from various parts of India, especially from temples across Tamil Nadu. In fact, you would be surprised to know that Tamil Nadu has a separate, antiquities police, like a CID wing, which deals with the stolen antiquities and FIRs pertaining to those things. So that was all very rampant. In fact, it was rampant the world over. But now countries are becoming aware of this. And, the customs and the border police is kind of making efforts to hold these things at the point of contact in their country rather than letting them go beyond and, be found later, be discovered later. So many of these artifacts were in fact discovered through the auction houses, their catalogs and the museum catalogs. And, when somebody recognizes it to be the same article, they kind of raise an alarm, and that is how the entire process of verification starts. And so once you prove your case, the artifacts are returned to the host country as per the UN convention. And so that is the background of how these pieces are returning to India. In fact, not only the US, India has a lot of articles at other places, especially in countries like the UK, Australia, France. And, it's a work in progress that India has been pursuing many of these countries. In fact, these countries are also voluntarily returning Indian artifacts whenever they are discovered to have been stolen or smuggled through means that are not fair.
Right. And could you tell us a little bit about some of the artifacts in question?
So we had spoken about these 105 articles that were lying in the New York attorney's office after, they were confiscated by the US border authorities and the customs and, proven to have been of Indian provenance. So these artifacts, in fact, are very important because they span a period of 1600 years. The oldest article in this slot comes from the 1st century BC, and the newest article is about 800 years old, 15th century AD. And these articles, in fact, hold a significant historical and market value, even as their exact worth could not be calculated at the moment. They also represent a wide geographical spread in terms of their origin in India, covering almost all parts of the country. They also cover various religious subjects, such as some of them pertain to the Hindu gods. There are the Jain antiquities, and they also pertain to Islamic traditions. And some of them, of course, have their cultural significance.
Okay, and do we know what happens once these artifacts are back in India?
So once the objects reach India, in fact, they are considered to be in Indian custody once they are handed over to the Indian mission or high commission abroad, which just happened last week in case of these 105 objects. So then they're considered to be in Indian custody. Then the ASI, the Archaeological Survey of India, which is the custodian of all the antiquities, they dispatch a team to the specific mission. They verify, the experts verify, and these objects to be matching with the FIRs or other evidence to be the same objects that we lost. And once that verification is done by experts, the ASI makes logistical arrangements to get these objects back home. Once they are back home, they are again in ASI custody. And then ASI will decide whether these objects have to be returned to their original place, which is to be handed to the state government. Or, in fact, many of these repatriated antiquities are being held currently at Delhi's Purana Killa, which is the government's antiquity collection. And some of them are also on display at the Confiscated Antiquities Museum at the Purana Killa.
Right. And Divya, you mentioned that many of the Indian artifacts were also smuggled to different countries, like France, Italy. So can you tell us what the government is doing to make sure that those are returned?
So, because a lot of these artifacts were found in the US in the recent times, and we've got around 300 of them back from the US in the last 4-5 years. So now India is pursuing agreements pertaining to the return of antiquities through specific cultural property agreements with various countries. We have signed one with the US, which found mention in the joint statement after Prime Minister Modi's state visit last month. And according to this, as we are told, the US has promised that it will do all that is within its power to intercept smuggled goods at the border itself and also make procedures to return them very fast. In fact, with the US having accepted this kind of a framework, India is very hopeful that other countries where many of our artifacts are supposed to have been smuggled in the last 20 years or beyond, we are also trying to look at such bilateral agreements with other countries like the UK, France, Italy, and Australia.
And in the end, we talk about a scheme by the Jharkhand government which aims to provide alternative livelihoods to women who used to sell rice beer, also known as hadia, in the local markets.
In Jharkhand, there is this tradition where people generally brew rice beer at homes and they drink it usually in festivals and, of course, in their daily life.
That's the Indian Express's Abhishek Angad, who reports on Jharkhand for the paper.
But some of the women, because there are no jobs, they also sell it in the market, and because it's cheap and cheap source of getting inebriated, so people actually prefer this over any English liquor. So there are a lot of women who used to sell it, and as a consequence, a lot of men also started drinking because it was so easily available.
And he says that this is why the government decided to provide these women with an alternative source of income. And so in September 2020, it launched the Phulo Jhano Ashirwad Abhiyan scheme, under which these women could apply for an interest-free micro loan to start other businesses.
So the idea was to give them some money, that is a corpus of around rupees 10,000 per woman who actually joins this scheme. And then those women can actually start some micro enterprise from that money. And as a consequence, there will be certain amount of monthly income that these women will get, and eventually they will leave selling liquors.
Now, before the scheme was launched, the government had conducted a survey to find out whether these women were interested in starting a new business. And in the early phase of the survey, they found out that more than 15,000 women were eager to start new businesses if they received financial support.
So they said, they were looking for a respectable life because it was getting difficult to, for instance, if there are like 6 family members in their house, it's getting difficult to feed everyone, look for their education, and also sort of respectability to the job, because it was little difficult for them, because every time they used to go, it may not be that they would get the entire hadia produce sold that particular day. And sometimes the quality also was not as intended. So there were risks in that business also. Plus there were social factors which was they used to actually sometimes they were faced harassment from men and everywhere, but that's not very dominating. I spoke to women, but yes, there were problems, and they were also very sick of selling liquor, but also didn't want their husband to get drunk and come home at night. So there was this conflict. So they eventually wanted to move away from selling liquor.
And so a lot of women decided to join the scheme. In fact, on Monday, the government said that in the last 2 years, they had managed to bring more than 23,000 women under the ambit of the scheme and had disbursed more than 23 crore rupees in interest-free loans. Now, Abhishek says that although most women embraced the opportunity and established an alternative source of income, like opening a grocery store or a small poultry farm, not everyone found success.
There are other set of women who actually thought initially that it's good, and they're fine with that. They had made a shift, but the business did not eventually take off. So one woman that I spoke to was Sukri Devi, and what happened was that a month back shut her food joint because it did not run as it was intended. But now that she has gotten an understanding of that she could do more than just selling liquor, so what she's done is now she has migrated to Gujarat. And I hope that it's not a distress migration. I hope that her working conditions are fine in Gujarat, which the state governments need to look into. And I spoke to her daughter, and daughter said that she was really interested in continuing her job and continuing her business as selling samosa and pakoras that she was doing, but business did not take. So she's now working in a very candle manufacturing industry in Gandhinagar in Gujarat.
But Abhishek says that apart from such cases where the women could not succeed, there were others who thrived because of the support and counseling they received from a network of women called Navjivan Sakhis, who played a vital role in guiding the Hadia sellers.
So one of the Navjivan Sakhis that I spoke to was Vyas Devi, and she's the one who actually added a lot of women into the scheme. And then she says now that all the women that she had spoken to and added to this scheme is essentially are in their own business, but she sometimes just speaks to them and sees that if something is not picking up, then she just tries to counsel them. So that's what she thinks is very essential, because sometimes there will be no customers, like say for a day or two, but then if at all they have to go away from liquor business, then they just shouldn't lose hope, and they just need to try means to do better in the job.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was hosted by me, Rahel Philipose, and written and produced by Utsa, Sarmin, me, Rahel Philipose, and Shashank Bhargava. It was edited and mixed by Abhishek Kumar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone who you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at @expresspodcast and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.